Tân Hạ Village, an ancient land shrouded in mist, where the cries of the dead have never faded. Beneath its withered fields and twisted banyan roots lies a darkness older than memory. For generations, the villagers have lived with whispers in the night, screams that pierce the silence, and shadows that watch from the corners of their homes. It began with the arrival of a wanderer, Min, who sought nothing but shelter. Yet fate bound him to a curse written in blood, the forbidden ritual of Thiên Linh Cái. Through him, the spirits stirred again, infants never born, mothers torn apart, and a sorcerer whose hunger for power defied death itself. This is not merely a tale of haunting, but of blood, grief, and vengeance, a journey into the heart of a curse where the line between the living and the dead dissolves, and the price of survival may be one's very soul. Chapter 1. The Cursed Village. The story began in Tân Hạ, a remote village deep in the wilderness. At first glance, it seemed like any ordinary countryside settlement, but beneath the peaceful surface lay whispers of terror that had haunted generations. People rarely spoke of it openly. When they did, their voices dropped to a whisper, and their eyes darted toward the old shrine at the edge of the village, where no one dared to set foot after dusk. The tale was of the Thiên Linh Cái, a form of black magic born of cruelty and blood. It was said that long ago, a sorcerer had chosen Tân Hạ to perform forbidden rituals, ripping unborn children from their mothers, sealing their bodies inside earthen jars, and burying them beneath cursed soil. Each jar became a prison of resentment, each wail a call from beyond. On quiet nights, villagers swore they could hear the thin cries of infants drifting through the mist. Some even claimed to see a woman in a blood-red gown, wandering aimlessly along the riverbank, clutching her torn belly, searching for the child that had been taken from her. Over time, the village fell into silence. People lived, worked, and died without ever daring to mention the cursed jars. But a shadow of fear lingered in every household, passed down like an unspoken inheritance. It was into this silence that Min, an unsuspecting young man from afar, arrived in Tân Hạ. He thought he was merely visiting relatives, unaware that his first night in the village would mark the beginning of a descent into horror. That night, as the wind howled through the bamboo groves, Min awoke to the faint sound of a baby crying outside his window. At first, he dismissed it as a stray animal, but when he peered out, his heart froze. There, beneath the pale moonlight, sat a tiny figure, naked, blood-red, its eyes pale and empty. The infant's mouth stretched wide into a grotesque grin, as it crawled slowly toward his door, leaving a trail of blood across the dirt. Min staggered backward, cold sweat pouring down his face. The baby raised its head, and in a voice that was neither infant nor human, it rasped, "Father." And so began Min's nightmare. Chapter 2. The Sorcerer. The villagers of Tân Hạ were no strangers to strange occurrences. Every family carried their own secrets, but all shared the same fear, the curse of Thiên Linh Cái. After the terrifying night when Min first encountered the blood-red infant outside his door, he was left shaken and sleepless. The memory of that pale, grinning face haunted his mind. He knew he could not remain ignorant any longer. He had to find out what evil bound this village in silence. It was then that he met Old Bay, a gaunt elder with sunken eyes, who seemed to know more than he should. When Min pressed him for answers, the old man hesitated, his hands trembling as he lit a stick of incense. "Some truths," Old Bay said, voice low and hoarse, "are better left buried, but since you've already seen it, you cannot escape." He leaned closer, his breath carrying the scent of tobacco and age. "What you saw was no ordinary ghost. It is the work of a sorcerer, one who traded his humanity for power. Decades ago, a man arrived here, claiming to be a wandering healer. The villagers welcomed him, never suspecting that he had come to sow death." Old Bay's eyes darkened as he continued. "He performed a ritual known as Thiên Linh Cái. He would lure pregnant women, promise them cures and blessings, but in secret, he carved open their bellies, tore the fetuses out, and sealed them in jars lined with charms written in blood. Those jars were buried beneath the soil of this very land. The souls of the children were trapped, forever wailing, feeding the sorcerer's power." Min's stomach churned, his voice cracked. "And the women?" Old Bay closed his eyes. Their bodies were discarded like broken husks. Some were buried beneath the banyan tree, others cast into the river. That is why people say they still see the woman in red wandering at night. She is but one of many, searching for the child ripped from her womb. The old man's hands shook violently as he spoke. His face glistened with sweat despite the cold night air. The sorcerer died long ago, or so people believe, but death does not always end a curse. His ritual lives on. The jars remain buried. The cries you hear, they are not echoes of the past. They are here. They are alive. A gust of wind howled through the room, making the oil lamp flicker. Min shivered, though not from the cold. He felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on him. Old Bay leaned closer, whispering with finality. The sorcerer may be gone, but his shadow still lingers. And you, boy, you are already marked. At that moment, Min realized he was no longer just a visitor in Tan Ha. He was a pawn in a nightmare woven from blood, death, and unspeakable sorcery. Chapter 3. The Blood Mark. After hearing Old Bay's chilling tale, Min felt as though his entire body had turned to stone. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed darker, heavier, as if they were pressing down on him. But the horror had only just begun. That night, Min lay in bed, tossing restlessly. The oil lamp flickered weakly, casting long, twisted shadows across the walls. Just as he began to drift into uneasy sleep, a searing pain ripped through his chest. He gasped, clutching at his shirt, and when he looked down, his heart nearly stopped. A crimson sigil was burning itself into his flesh. Right above his heart, the lines wriggled like living veins, glowing faintly in the darkness. Blood seeped from the mark, staining his clothes. Min screamed. The door burst open, and Old Bay rushed in, eyes widening in horror when he saw the mark. "Troy Dat, it's the blood mark," he cried, stumbling backward. Min grabbed his arm, desperate. "What is happening to me?" The old man's voice shook. "You've been chosen. The spirits have marked you. From now on, every jar, every soul trapped beneath this village will know your blood. You are bound to them." As if to confirm his words, the room suddenly filled with the sound of wailing. The cries of countless infants echoed from beneath the floor, from the walls, from the very air itself. Min covered his ears, but the voices pierced straight into his mind. "Father, Father, Father." His vision blurred, shadows crawled along the walls, forming shapes of tiny bodies with pale, lifeless eyes. They reached for him, dozens of hands clawing at his chest. Min thrashed, screaming, but the mark burned hotter, searing him from the inside out. Old Bay threw himself into a frantic chant, scattering protective charms around the room. The shadows recoiled slightly, but the wailing only grew louder. "Listen to me, boy," the old man shouted. "As long as that mark is on your chest, they will never leave you. You are both their prison and their key. If you falter, they will tear you apart. If you resist, they will drown you in blood. This is the price of stepping into Tan Ha." The voices rose to a deafening crescendo. Min collapsed, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with terror. And deep within the burning sigil, he felt it, hundreds of tiny heartbeats, all pulsing in rhythm with his own. Chapter 4. The First Night of Terror. That night was only the beginning. After Old Bay left, Min lay motionless on the floor, drenched in sweat, his chest still throbbing from the burning sigil. The wails of the unseen children lingered in his mind, even though the house had fallen into silence. He forced himself back onto the bed, clutching at his chest, praying that dawn would come quickly. But the night had other plans. Around midnight, the oil lamp sputtered and went out. Darkness swallowed the room whole. Min's breath quickened as he sat up, straining to see through the gloom. That was when he heard it, a faint scratching sound against the window. Scritch, scritch, scritch. The noise grew louder, closer. His heart pounded. Slowly, Min turned his head. Through the window pane, pressed against the glass, was the face of a child. Its skin was gray and sagging, its eyes pale and empty, its mouth stretched into a smile that was all teeth. The child's tiny hand smeared bloody streaks down the glass as it whispered, "Father." Min screamed and stumbled backward. The window rattled violently. as though dozens of small fists were pounding against it from the outside. Bang, bang, bang. The door began to shake. Tiny voices filled the air, chanting in unison. "Father, Father, let us in." Min pressed himself against the wall, shaking uncontrollably. His chest burned, the sigil glowing faintly through his shirt. The voices grew louder, shriller, until it felt like knives piercing his skull. Suddenly, the door burst open with a deafening crash. Cold wind and the smell of rot flooded into the room. Dozens of small figures crawled inside, children with swollen bellies, skeletal limbs, and hollow eyes. They scuttled across the floor like insects, their mouths opening wide as they wailed. Min froze, paralyzed with terror. The nearest child dragged itself toward him, its nails scraping grooves into the wood. It climbed onto his lap, its head lolling unnaturally to one side. It leaned close, its foul breath against his ear, and whispered again. "Father." Min's scream tore through the night. Chapter 5. The Woman in Red. After that night, Min no longer doubted Old Bay's words. The cursed blood mark had chained him to the unborn spirits, and their cries gnawed at his sanity. But the horrors had only just begun. On the third night, when the village lay in silence, Min wandered outside, unable to bear the suffocating darkness of his room. The moon hung low, casting a pale light over the withered fields. Mist curled through the trees like ghostly fingers. As he walked, a sound drifted through the air, a woman sobbing. It was faint at first, almost swallowed by the wind, but it grew clearer with every step. Drawn by a force he could not resist, Min followed the sound to the riverbank. There, beneath the moonlight, stood a woman in a flowing blood-red gown. Her hair was long and matted, hanging over her face. Her hands clutched at her belly, which was torn open, raw and gaping, blood dripping into the river. She swayed as she wept, her voice echoing across the water. "My child, give me back my child." Min froze, his throat dry. The air grew cold, each breath a cloud of frost. Suddenly, the woman lifted her head. Her face was pale as bone, eyes hollow, and her lips stretched into a smile far too wide. She pointed a trembling finger at him. You carry my child's blood?" Min staggered back, shaking his head. "No, I don't, I." The woman screamed, a shrill cry that shattered the silence. The river churned violently, and dozens of small, pale hands broke through the surface. Reaching toward the shore, faces of infants surfaced in the water, their mouths open in endless cries. Min stumbled, his chest burning with unbearable heat as the blood mark pulsed. The woman in red glided closer, her torn gown trailing in the mud, her hollow eyes fixed on him. "Return my child to me, or drown in their cries." The river roared, the hands clawed at his ankles. Min screamed, thrashing as icy fingers dragged him toward the black water. At that moment, Old Bay appeared, shouting incantations as he hurled burning talismans onto the ground. Flames erupted, forming a barrier between Min and the river. The ghostly hands recoiled, hissing, before sinking back beneath the surface. The woman in red shrieked, her body twisting unnaturally, before vanishing into the mist. Old Bay grabbed Min, pulling him up. His face was pale, his voice grave. "You've seen her now, the mother in red. She is the first of many, and she will not stop until the blood mark delivers what she seeks." Min's chest still throbbed with heat, the sigil glowing faintly under his shirt. He realized that the curse was no longer just haunting him, it was hunting him. Chapter 6. The Jar of Flesh. The following day, Min sat pale and silent in Old Bay's hut. His hands still trembled from the encounter at the river. The old man busied himself preparing protective charms, his face drawn with worry. "What you saw last night," Old Bay said grimly, "was one of the mothers whose children were taken for the ritual. There are many like her. They wander, bound by grief and rage, until the jars are destroyed, or until they claim enough blood to rest." Min swallowed hard, his voice hoarse. "These jars, where are they?" The old man's hand froze for a moment. He did not answer right away. Instead, he reached into a chest, pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth, and carefully placed it on the table. When he unwrapped it, Min recoiled. Inside was a small earthen jar. cracked and stained dark. Strange symbols were carved across its surface, and from the hairline fractures seeped a foul, sticky fluid. The smell was unbearable, rotting flesh and dried blood. "This," Old Bay whispered, "is a Thiên Linh jar, one of many buried across this land. Each contains the remains of an unborn child, bound by sorcery. Destroying one releases its spirit, but also unleashes its wrath." Min's stomach lurched, his chest throbbed violently, the blood mark glowing through his shirt. As his eyes locked on the jar, he heard it, a faint whimpering, like a baby crying from inside the clay. "Father." The word crawled into his skull. Min staggered back, clutching his head. Old Bay slammed his palm onto the jar, chanting furiously. The wailing ceased, but the jar shuddered, as if something inside was desperate to escape. "You must understand," the old man rasped. "These jars are prisons. Break one, and the spirit will claw its way out, latching onto the nearest living host. But leave them buried, and their cries will never end. That is the curse we live with." Min stared at the jar, horror etched across his face. "And because of this mark, they see me as their father," Old Bay finished, his voice heavy with dread. "The one who holds the key." Suddenly, the jar cracked loudly, a splinter running down its side. A tiny, bloodied hand burst through, twitching and clawing at the air. A shrill infant's wail filled the hut, so piercing Min felt his ears would tear. The old man shouted a prayer and hurled a burning charm onto the jar. Flames engulfed it, and the hand withered, curling back inside. The crying faded into a pitiful whimper before silence fell once more. Smoke curled in the air, carrying the stench of scorched flesh. Min staggered against the wall, shaking violently. Old Bay's voice was a whisper, almost lost in the crackling of the fire. "This is only one jar. There are dozens buried beneath Tân Hạ. And now, because of that mark on your chest, they will all come for you." Chapter 7. The Graveyard Beneath the Banyan. That night, Old Bay led Min through the mist-shrouded fields to the ancient banyan tree that loomed at the edge of Tân Hạ. Its roots sprawled across the ground like the coils of a serpent, thick and gnarled, sinking deep into the cursed soil. "This is where it began," Old Bay whispered, his voice trembling. "The sorcerer buried the women here, those whose wombs he emptied for the ritual. Beneath this tree lies a graveyard no one dares to disturb." The moon cast a pale light over the banyan, and Min felt the mark on his chest burn hotter. His breath grew shallow as whispers filled his ears, soft, broken voices of women crying, calling for their children. They stepped closer, and suddenly the ground seemed to pulse, as if something beneath the soil was alive. Min froze when he saw the earth at the foot of the tree stir. Slowly, a pale hand broke through the dirt, followed by another. Then, crawling from the soil, emerged the figure of a woman. Her hair was matted with earth, her eyes hollow sockets, her belly torn and empty. She clawed at the roots, dragging herself forward, her mouth opening in a soundless scream. Behind her, more figures began to surface, dozens of women with mutilated bellies, their faces twisted in grief and rage. They staggered toward Min, arms outstretched. The blood mark on his chest flared, searing his flesh. He gasped, clutching at it, as the spirits cried out in unison. "Father, give them back, give us back our children." Min stumbled backward, but the banyan's roots shifted, rising like serpents to block his path. The air grew suffocating, thick with the stench of decay. Old Bay shouted incantations, hurling charms that burst into flames upon the ground. Some of the spirits recoiled, shrieking, but others pressed on, their eyes fixed on Min. One of the women lurched close enough that Min saw her face clearly, half-rotted. Yet her lips trembled as she whispered, "You carry their blood, return them, or share our grave." Suddenly, the earth split wide at the base of the tree, revealing a pit filled with shattered jars. From within each jar rose faint cries, blending into a chorus of infants' wails. The sound rattled Min's bones, making him fall to his knees. The spirits shrieked, reaching for him, their nails digging into the soil, pulling themselves closer. The blood mark blazed like fire, forcing Min to scream in agony. Old Bay grabbed him by the arm, dragging him away with desperate strength. His voice cracked as he shouted, If you stay, they'll drag you down into the pit. Run, boy, run. The last thing Min saw before he stumbled into the mist was the pit yawning wider, filled with jars that wept blood, and the women's hollow eyes fixed upon him, filled with endless grief and vengeance. Chapter 8. The curse deepens. Min returned from the banyan tree drenched in cold sweat, his body trembling uncontrollably, the image of the pit beneath the roots, filled with shattered jars and wailing cries, refused to leave his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the hollow-eyed women crawling toward him, their mutilated wombs bleeding endlessly. Inside Old Bay's hut, Min sat hunched over, gasping for breath. The old man burned incense and placed charms at the corners of the room, his face grim and weary. "You see now, don't you?" Old Bay muttered, his voice hoarse. "The curse is far deeper than a handful of wandering spirits. The entire village is built on a graveyard of unborn children. Their blood feeds the soil. Their cries feed the shadows. And now, because of the mark, you are their beacon." Min pressed a hand against his chest, where the blood mark throbbed like a second heart. His voice shook. "Why me? Why did they choose me?" The old man did not answer immediately. Instead, he poured water into a bowl and dropped in a handful of ashes. The surface rippled, then darkened, showing a distorted reflection of Min's face. "Sometimes it is not choice," Old Bay said quietly. "Sometimes it is fate. The moment you stepped into Tan Ha, the curse recognized you. It carved itself into your flesh. Now you cannot leave, no matter where you go. The cries will follow." The bowl trembled in the old man's hands. From the black water rose faint images, dozens of tiny hands reaching, clawing upward. Min staggered back, horrified. Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced the air. Min clutched his chest and collapsed, writhing on the floor. The blood mark glowed fiercely, and a thin stream of blood seeped from it, dripping onto the floorboards. The drops hissed as they touched the wood, spreading into symbols that writhed like living worms. Shadows crawled up the walls, forming the shapes of infants with hollow eyes and gaping mouths. Their wails filled the hut, shrill and merciless. "Father, father!" Min screamed, clutching his head, his body convulsing. Old Bay hurled burning talismans into the shadows, chanting louder and louder, sweat pouring down his wrinkled face. The shadows shrieked and withdrew, but the crying did not stop. It seemed to echo from beneath the very ground, from the depths of the earth itself. The old man's voice broke as he forced out the words. "Boy, this is only the beginning. The curse is awake now. Each night will grow worse. And when the next full moon rises, the spirits will demand more than just your blood." Min lay on the floor, chest heaving, his eyes wide with terror. He knew, with a dreadful certainty, that Old Bay was right. The curse was not fading. It was tightening its grip around him. Chapter 9. The Possession. The days that followed blurred into a haze of dread. Min wandered through the village like a man half dead, his eyes sunken, his skin pale. The blood mark on his chest pulsed ceaselessly, burning at night, itching during the day, as if something inside it wanted to crawl free. The villagers avoided him. Whenever he passed, they averted their eyes, whispering prayers under their breath. Mothers clutched their children tightly, dragging them indoors. Min felt their fear, and in his heart, he could not blame them. He too was afraid of himself. On the seventh night, the nightmare reached its peak. It began with the cries. At first, faint and distant, like an echo in the mist. Then louder, closer, until they filled the entire house. Min sat upright, clutching his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The lamp went out. Darkness pressed against him from all sides. The cries rose to a deafening chorus. Then he heard it, a voice, low and commanding, buried beneath the children's wails. "You are ours. Give us your flesh." Min screamed as the blood mark flared, searing through his body. His limbs jerked violently, his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed onto the floor, convulsing. Shadows surged across the room, wrapping around him like chains. From the blackness emerged tiny figures, infants crawling over his body, their nails digging into his skin, their mouths biting, gnawing at his flesh. Yet there was no blood, only an icy numbness that spread through his veins. Min's screams turned to gurgles. His body arched, his chest rising unnaturally high. And then his voice changed. "Father, Father, we are here." But it was not Min speaking. His lips moved, yet dozens of voices poured from his throat at once, the voices of children, layered together in a cacophony of horror. His eyes snapped open, they glowed faintly red. Old Bay burst into the room, clutching a bundle of talismans. His face drained of color when he saw Min's body writhing, the blood mark pulsing like a living thing. "No, they've begun to take him." He flung charms at the walls, chanting furiously. Flames sparked, driving the shadows back, but Min only screamed louder. His arms thrashed, his voice rising in a chorus of cries. "We are many, we are hungry, we will not leave." Old Bay threw himself onto Min, pressing a talisman directly onto the burning mark. Smoke hissed, and Min let out an inhuman wail that shook the house. For a moment, the voices faltered. Min's own voice broke through, desperate and terrified. "Help me, they're inside me." The old man cried out, his arms trembling as he forced the talisman down harder, burning his own hands. "Fight them, boy, don't let them in, you are not their vessel yet." The air grew thick with the stench of blood and ash. Min convulsed one last time, then collapsed, motionless. The wailing ceased. Silence fell, broken only by Old Bay's ragged breathing. He looked at Min's pale face, the blood mark still glowing faintly beneath his shirt, and whispered, "It's only a matter of time before they take him completely." Chapter 10. The Sacrificial Well. The following evening, Old Bay took Min deeper into the village, past the crumbling huts and the fields that never yielded harvests. The air grew heavier the further they walked, thick with the stench of rot. Finally, they arrived at an abandoned courtyard where a stone well stood, covered in moss, its mouth sealed with rotting planks. "This," Old Bay whispered, "is the sacrificial well. Long ago, the sorcerer used it as an altar. Blood was poured into its depths, women, children, even men who opposed him. Their cries have never left." Min's chest throbbed violently as they approached. The blood mark flared, and his vision blurred. He heard voices echoing from the well, faint at first, then swelling into a chorus. "Father, feed us, feed us." The planks across the well shuddered, as if struck from below. Dust fell from the cracks, and the sound of splashing water echoed upward. Min staggered back, clutching his chest. Old Bay knelt beside the well, scattering charms around its rim. His voice trembled as he chanted, but the ground shook, and with a thunderous crack, the planks split apart. From the depths rose a torrent of black water, reeking of decay. In the churning liquid, pale faces surfaced, children, women, all screaming, their mouths opened in endless wails. Hands burst from the water, clawing at the air, reaching for Min. One hand shot upward, seizing his ankle with a grip like iron. Min screamed, falling to the ground as the hand dragged him toward the well. More hands followed, cold and slick, wrapping around his arms, his legs, pulling him inch by inch. "Father, join us, come below." The voices rose to a frenzy. Min struggled, kicking, but the pull was irresistible. His chest seared with unbearable pain, the mark glowing brighter than ever. He felt his body being drawn toward the black abyss. Old Bay shouted, his voice raw with desperation. He hurled a talisman into the well, and flames erupted, searing the black water. The spirits shrieked, recoiling, their hands slipping away. Min tumbled backward, gasping for breath, as the well roared with rage. The fire burned bright for a moment, then sputtered out, leaving only the sound of faint weeping drifting from the depths. The planks had shattered completely, leaving the well gaping open like a mouth. Old Bay's face was pale, drenched in sweat, his voice shook. "The seal is broken, it will not hold them much longer. When the next full moon comes, the well will overflow with blood." Min shivered, staring into the darkness below. He knew, with a sinking dread, that the sacrificial well was not merely a grave, it was a gateway. And it was waiting for him. Chapter 11. The Night of the Full Moon. The days crawled by in dreadful silence. Min's body weakened, his skin pale and clammy, as though the blood mark was draining the life from him. The villagers grew restless. They whispered about omens, strange shadows flitting across the fields. livestock found dead with their throats slit, and children waking in the night, screaming about voices calling their names. When the full moon finally rose, the entire village seemed to hold its breath. The sky was clear, the moon vast and swollen, casting a red tint across the land. Min sat inside Old Bay's hut, trembling. The mark on his chest pulsed violently, each beat searing through his ribs like fire. Suddenly, the crying began. It started as a faint whimper, drifting from the fields, then another joined, and another. Within minutes, the air was filled with the wailing of countless infants, overlapping in a deafening chorus that rattled the very walls of the hut. The oil lamp sputtered out. The air turned icy cold. Min clutched his chest, gasping. His vision blurred, and shadows swirled before his eyes. Through the window, he saw them, dozens, no, hundreds, of tiny figures crawling across the ground, their pale bodies glistening under the moonlight. Their bellies were swollen, their limbs twisted, their eyes glowing faintly. "Father, Father," they chanted, their voices like knives. The ground shook violently. From the direction of the sacrificial well came a thunderous roar. Black water erupted into the air, splashing across the fields. With it came more figures, women in tattered red gowns, their bellies torn open, their faces twisted with rage. One of them drifted above the ground, her long hair streaming like black smoke. She pointed straight at Min, her voice shrill and piercing. "Give them back, return what was taken." Min screamed as the mark on his chest burst open, blood streaming down his torso. The wailing spirits surged toward the hut, slamming against the walls. Tiny hands forced their way through the cracks, clawing at the air. Old Bay shouted incantations, scattering talismans, but the spirits pressed on. The charms burned bright, then flickered, as if about to fail. The woman in red floated closer, her hollow eyes fixed on Min. Her voice thundered like a storm. "If you will not return them, then you will join them." The ground split open beneath Min's feet. He felt himself being dragged down, icy hands clawing at his legs. The cries grew unbearable, filling his skull until he thought it would shatter. Old Bay flung himself forward, slamming a burning charm onto Min's chest. Smoke and blood hissed as the mark seared, and Min let out a scream that was not entirely human. The spirits shrieked in fury, recoiling from the sudden burst of light. The pit beneath his feet snapped shut. The crawling infants dissolved into mist. The woman in red shrieked one last time before vanishing into the night. Silence returned, broken only by Min's ragged sobs. His body shook violently, blood soaking his clothes. Old Bay collapsed beside him, his voice a broken whisper. "The full moon has passed, but this was only the first. Next time, boy, they will not be driven back." Chapter 12. The Hunter of Souls. The village of Tan Ha fell into uneasy silence after the night of the full moon. The cries had faded, but the dread remained. Villagers avoided the well, the banyan, and even the paths through the fields. They whispered of shadows moving at the edge of their sight, and of voices calling them by name when they walked alone at night. For Min, the torment did not end. The blood mark on his chest still pulsed ceaselessly, sometimes so hot it burned, sometimes so cold it froze his veins. Each night he dreamed of children reaching for him, their cries gnawing at his sanity. Old Bay grew thinner and weaker, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. One evening, as he prepared another set of talismans, he spoke in a voice that trembled with fear. "There is something worse than the mothers and their children, something born from the ritual itself. The villagers call it the Hunter of Souls." Min frowned, his throat dry. "What is it?" Old Bay's hand shook as he pressed a talisman onto Min's chest to dull the throbbing mark. His voice dropped to a whisper. When the sorcerer performed the rituals, he did not work alone. He bargained with the abyss, and in return, the abyss gave him a servant, an entity that stalks the living, dragging souls to feed the unborn trapped in the jars. It does not weep, it does not speak, it only hunts. That night, Min learned the truth. The wind howled through the bamboo groves, and the dogs in the village began to bark frantically before falling silent. Min sat upright in bed, the mark on his chest searing. Through the darkness, he felt it, a presence, cold and suffocating, watching him. The door creaked open though no wind blew. Standing in the threshold was a figure cloaked in shadows. Tall and thin, its limbs impossibly long. Where its face should have been, there was only a void. A black hollow that devoured the light. It stepped inside, each footfall silent, yet the floorboards groaned as though in pain. Min could not move, his body frozen in terror. The mark on his chest blazed, and he heard the whispers again. "Father, Father." The hunter stretched out a hand, long and skeletal, reaching for his chest. The air around it warped, chilling to the bone. Min's vision swam. His body trembled as if his very soul was being pulled from him. Just before the hand touched him, Old Bay burst into the room, chanting with a voice hoarse and frantic. He hurled talismans that burst into flames as they struck the floor. The hunter paused, its head tilting unnaturally. Slowly, it withdrew its hand, the void where its face should have been fixed on Old Bay. The old man's voice broke as he screamed, "Begone, servant of the abyss, this soul is not yours yet." The hunter let out no sound, but the air quaked with a pressure so heavy that Min thought his chest would collapse. Then, without a word, the figure dissolved into smoke and slipped back into the shadows. The flames sputtered out, leaving the room heavy with silence. Min collapsed, gasping, tears streaming down his face. Old Bay sank to his knees, sweat dripping from his brow. His voice was a whisper, ragged and full of despair. The mothers cry for their children. The children cry for blood. But the hunter, it cries for nothing. It will return, boy, and when it does, even I may not be able to stop it. Chapter 13. The Pact of Blood. The night after the hunter appeared, Min could not sleep. Every creak of the wooden beams, every whisper of the wind against the shutters felt like footsteps creeping closer. The blood mark on his chest pulsed with restless heat, as if warning him that something darker was drawing near. Old Bay sat beside the dim glow of an oil lamp, his wrinkled hands shaking as he wrote charms on strips of yellow paper. His face was pale, his eyes sunken with exhaustion. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "Boy, if you want to survive this curse, there is only one way. You must make a pact of blood." Min's head snapped up, his throat tightened. A pact? With what? The old man hesitated, his voice lowering to a hoarse whisper. "Not with the living, with the dead. The spirits already claim you as their father. The mark binds you. If you do not submit, they will devour you. But if you offer them your blood willingly, you might command them. Even if only for a time." Min's face twisted with disbelief. "You mean, I must become like the sorcerer?" Old Bay slammed his hand on the table, his eyes flashing with fury. "No, that monster tore children from the womb, forced them into jars, and fed on their agony. You would not be him. But you, marked as you are, have a choice. Either drown in their hunger, or give them a part of yourself so they obey." Silence filled the hut. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying faint cries on its breath. Min stared at the floor, his chest aching from the throbbing mark. At last, he whispered, "What must I do?" Old Bay's hands shook as he drew a dagger from his chest box. Its blade was blackened, ancient, etched with strange symbols that seemed to writhe in the lamplight. "This knife has tasted the blood of countless rituals. Tonight, it must taste yours. Cut the palm of your hand and drip blood onto the mark. If the spirits accept, they will obey your command, for now. But know this, boy, each drop you give binds you closer to them. One day, there may be nothing left of you at all." Min's heart pounded. He took the dagger with trembling hands, its cold weight heavy with dread. He stared at the blade, his reflection warped in its dark surface. The cries outside grew louder, surrounding the hut, pressing against the walls, the mark on his chest seared, demanding release. With a choked breath, Min sliced his palm, blood welled up, dripping hot and thick. He pressed his bleeding hand against the mark. At once, the room shook, the oil lamp guttered, shadows twisting wildly across the walls. The cries rose to a deafening roar. Min gasped as pain shot through him, his blood merging with the mark. Then, silence. The shadows stilled, the cries ceased. For the first time in weeks, there was quiet. Min opened his eyes, trembling, The mark no longer burned, it pulsed steadily, like a second heartbeat. And in the silence, a whisper brushed against his ear. "Father, we are yours now?" Min fell to his knees, clutching his chest. He had survived the pact, but deep inside, he knew the price he had just begun to pay. Chapter 14. The jar breaks. The night after the pact, Min felt a strange calm. The cries that once clawed at his mind had fallen silent, replaced by a low, steady pulse in his chest. It was as if the unborn spirits had curled up inside him, watching, waiting. But peace in Tan Ha never lasted. At dawn, a scream shattered the village silence. Min and Old Bay rushed to the outskirts, where a small crowd had gathered around a collapsed section of earth near the fields. Half buried in the soil was a jar, larger than the one Min had seen before. Its surface cracked wide open. From inside spilled foul liquid, dark and viscous, soaking into the dirt. A stench of rotting flesh and blood filled the air. One of the villagers gagged, pointing with trembling hands. It broke on its own. Before anyone could move, a shrill wail erupted from the jar. From its gaping crack, a tiny hand burst forth, twitching, then another, then a pale, malformed infant crawled out, its body smeared in blood and filth. Its eyes were milky white, its mouth stretched into a grin. The villagers screamed and stumbled back. The infant let out a piercing cry that made the air vibrate. Min's chest flared with pain. The mark pulsed violently, dragging him forward. The creature turned its head toward him, and in a voice that shook his bones, it rasped, "Father." Dozens of other jars beneath the soil began to tremble. Cracks spidered across their surfaces, and the ground quivered with the sound of muffled cries. Old Bay's face turned ashen. The pact, it has awakened them. The spirits no longer want to wait. The jars are breaking. The infant lurched forward, crawling with unnatural speed toward the villagers. Its tiny hands clawed at a man's leg, tearing through flesh as if it were paper. Blood sprayed, and the man collapsed, screaming. The infant buried its face into the wound, sucking greedily. The villagers fled in terror. Min stood frozen, the mark on his chest burning hotter with every second. His vision blurred, and he heard the whispers in his skull. "Command us, Father, or we will feed." With trembling hands, Min pressed his palm to the mark. His voice cracked as he shouted, "Stop!" The infant froze, its head snapping toward him. For a moment, silence fell. Then, slowly, it crawled back toward the shattered jar, curling inside like a grotesque newborn returning to the womb. The other jars stilled, their trembling ceasing. The cries faded into silence once more. Min collapsed to his knees, his chest heaving. Sweat drenched his body, and blood seeped through his shirt where the mark burned. Old Bay clutched his arm, his voice trembling. "You see now? The pact gives you power. Yes, but each time you use it, the line between you and them fades. One day, boy, you may not be commanding them, they may be commanding you." Min stared at the cracked jar, the tiny hand still twitching inside. He knew Old Bay spoke the truth. The pact had not saved him. It had only pulled him deeper into the curse. Chapter 15. The Haunting of the Fields. After the jar broke, fear spread through Tan Ha like a plague. The villagers no longer dared to work in the fields. At dusk, the once familiar paths were deserted, swallowed by mist that crept low across the ground. The cries that once came only at night now whispered faintly during the day, as if the spirits had grown bolder. Min could feel it in his chest. The mark throbbed constantly, pulling him toward the fields. It was as though something beneath the soil was calling him. One evening, against Old Bay's desperate warnings, Min walked into the fields alone. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and blood. Crops that had once grown here were now withered, their stalks twisted like skeletal fingers. As he ventured deeper, he heard it, the faint rustling of something crawling beneath the soil. He stopped, listening. The sound spread all around him, circling. Then, with a sudden crack, the earth split open. Dozens of tiny figures clawed their way out of the ground, infants. Their bodies pale and bloated, their mouths gaping open in soundless screams. Their eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight as they dragged themselves toward him. "Father," the voices echoed in his skull. Min stumbled back, but the mark on his chest flared, rooting him in place. The spirits surged closer, their tiny hands reaching for his legs, their nails digging into the soil as they pulled themselves forward. He pressed his bleeding palm against the mark, summoning the pact. "Stop," he shouted, his voice breaking. The spirits froze, trembling. For a moment, the field fell silent. Min's chest heaved as sweat poured down his face. But then, one of the infants let out a shriek, and the rest followed, their mouths opened wider, impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. They lunged at him. Min screamed, stumbling backward, tearing the talismans Old Bay had given him from his pocket. He hurled them into the soil. Flames burst to life, forming a barrier around him. The spirits shrieked, their bodies writhing in the firelight. Yet they did not retreat. Instead, they began to circle, dozens of them crawling just beyond the flames, their pale eyes fixed on him, unblinking, relentless. The air quivered with their cries. "Blood, Father, blood?" Min's knees buckled, the mark on his chest pulsed violently. Demanding, hungering, he realized the spirits were no longer simply calling him. They were feeding on his blood through the pact. The flames sputtered, flickering lower. The infants inched closer, their cries rising into a deafening chorus. Min thought his skull would split from the sound. Then, just as the barrier died, Old Bay appeared, chanting furiously. He planted his staff into the ground, and a surge of light flared outward, scattering the spirits back into the soil. The cries faded, swallowed by the earth, leaving only silence and the smell of burnt talismans. Min collapsed to the ground, shaking violently, his vision blurred, and he whispered hoarsely, "They won't stop, will they?" Old Bay's face was grim, his voice weary. "No, the fields are their grave. And now, boy, you are their shepherd. Wherever you go, they will follow." Min clutched his chest, the mark pulsing like a second heart. For the first time, he understood. There was no longer a line between the living and the dead. The fields had claimed him. Chapter 16. The Whispering Shadows. Nights in Tan Ha grew longer and heavier after the haunting of the fields. Even when no cries filled the air, the silence was unbearable, thick and suffocating, as though the village itself was holding its breath. Min barely slept. When he closed his eyes, he felt the mark pulsing on his chest, dragging him into visions where shadows moved and voices whispered from the darkness. One night, the whispers became too clear to ignore. He awoke in the dead of night to find the room cloaked in pitch-black darkness. The oil lamp had gone out, though he hadn't touched it. His ears rang with whispers, low, raspy voices that slithered through the walls. "Father, come to us, deeper, closer." Min sat up, drenched in sweat. The shadows in the corners of the hut seemed to writhe and crawl like living things. Slowly, shapes emerged, dozens of tiny figures, pale and translucent, their eyes like dull embers. They did not scream, they whispered. "We are cold, we are hungry, share your warmth, share your blood." The mark on Min's chest seared, glowing faintly through his shirt. He clutched at it, but the whispers only grew louder, weaving into his skull. He staggered to his feet, trembling, as if drawn toward the door by invisible strings. When he stepped outside, the village was drowned in mist. The air was still, yet the shadows stretched unnaturally long beneath the moonlight. They twisted, reaching for him. From the mist emerged the figure of a child, no taller than his knees. Its skin was gray, its limbs thin as sticks, its eyes two black pits. It tilted its head, and in a voice like dead leaves, it whispered, "Father, follow?" Min's legs moved against his will. He followed the child through the mist, past the huts, into the barren fields. The shadows around him lengthened, whispering all the while. Each whisper carried fragments of grief, pain, hunger, thousands of voices layered together. At the heart of the fields, the child stopped. It pointed at the earth. The soil split open with a sickening crack, revealing a dark hollow beneath. From within, countless hands reached upward, writhing, clawing. "Deeper, closer, join us," the voices hissed. Min fell to his knees, clutching his chest. The mark pulsed violently, streams of blood seeping through his shirt. His vision darkened as the whispers grew deafening. wrapping around his mind like chains. He nearly fell into the pit when a hand seized his shoulder, yanking him back. Old Bay's hoarse voice cut through the whispers as he hurled burning talismans into the earth. Flames erupted, sealing the pit shut with a roar. The shadows shrieked, recoiling into the mist. The child vanished. Silence fell, leaving only the sound of Min's ragged breathing. Old Bay's face was pale, his eyes hollow with dread. He whispered, "The shadows are no longer content to whisper. Soon, they will speak through you." Min trembled, his chest still bleeding, as the realization struck him. The whispers weren't just calling him, they were trying to become him. Chapter 17. The Sorcerer's Return. For weeks, Min endured the whispers of the shadows. Each night, they grew louder, clearer, more insistent. Sometimes they spoke in the voices of children, sometimes in the anguished cries of mothers, and sometimes, chillingly, in a deep, guttural voice that felt older than the village itself. One evening, under a blood-red sunset, Min collapsed in Old Bay's hut. His body trembled violently, the blood mark burning so hot it smoked through his shirt. Old Bay pressed talismans against his chest, chanting frantically, but the mark only grew brighter. Then, from the shadows in the corners of the hut, a shape began to form. At first, it was a blur, a distortion in the air. Then it grew sharper, darker, until a figure stood before them, tall, draped in tattered robes, its face hidden beneath a hood. The stench of blood and decay filled the room. Old Bay's chant faltered, his voice dropped to a whisper of horror. "No, it cannot be. He's been dead for decades." The figure lifted its head. Beneath the hood was a skeletal face, flesh clinging in tatters, eyes glowing faintly red, its mouth opened, and a voice like cracking bones filled the hut. "I am not gone. Blood remembers. Flesh remembers. You are mine." Min's heart nearly stopped. He knew instantly who it was. The sorcerer had returned. The mark on Min's chest flared as the sorcerer stretched out a bony hand. The shadows writhed, crawling up the walls, reaching toward him. Min screamed, falling to his knees, as he felt his blood surge toward the outstretched hand, as though being drained from his body. Old Bay slammed his staff into the ground, chanting with all the strength left in him. A circle of light burst forth, pushing the shadows back. The sorcerer hissed, his skeletal jaw twisting. "You cannot banish me, old fool. The boy is already mine. His blood, his soul, they belong to the jars. To me." Min gasped, struggling to stay conscious. His vision swam with images, the sorcerer performing the ancient rituals, ripping children from their mothers, sealing them into jars, laughing as their cries fed his power. The sorcerer's voice thundered, "Through him, I will rise again. Through him, my kingdom of blood will return." The shadows surged forward, slamming against the circle of light. The hut shook violently, the roof beams groaning. Old Bay's face twisted with strain as he cried out, "Boy, fight him. If you surrender, he will wear your flesh as his own." Min clutched his chest, the mark blazing like fire. He heard the children's voices, the mother's screams, the sorcerer's laughter, all colliding inside his skull. His body convulsed as the sorcerer's presence tried to force its way in. And for the first time, Min realized the truth. The mark was not just a bond. It was a door. If he failed to resist, the sorcerer would step through, and Min would be nothing but an empty shell. Chapter 18. The Battle Within. Min collapsed onto the floor, writhing as the sorcerer's presence forced its way into him. The blood mark on his chest blazed like molten fire, veins of red spreading across his skin as though his body itself were being rewritten. The sorcerer's skeletal figure loomed above him, its hollow eyes fixed on Min. From its rotting mouth poured a guttural chant, words older than language. Each syllable struck Min like a hammer, shaking his bones. Inside his mind, the darkness deepened. Min found himself standing in a vast, endless void. Shadows swirled around him, whispering in the voices of the unborn. From the abyss, the sorcerer stepped forward, not as a withered corpse now, but in the prime of his power. His eyes glowed like burning coals, his robes billowing as if alive. "You are nothing," the sorcerer's voice thundered. "Your blood is mine, your soul is mine. Through you, I shall rise again." Min's knees buckled, The cries of infants echoed from every direction, their tiny hands clawing at him from the void. The mother's wails joined in, a symphony of despair and rage. His mind nearly broke under the weight of it. "Father, father," the voices moaned. Min screamed, clutching his head, "I am not your father." The sorcerer laughed, his voice like cracking bones. "You carry the mark. You bled for them. You bound yourself with the pact. Whether you will it or not, you are their father. Their vessel. Their cage. You are mine." The shadows surged, swarming Min, burying him under a tide of clawing hands and gnashing teeth. He choked, drowning in the darkness. But then, through the cacophony, he heard another voice, faint, fragile, but familiar. It was the woman in red. "Min," she whispered, "do not give him everything. Your blood may bind you, but it is also your strength. Use it, resist him." Min gasped, forcing himself to raise his head. His palm burned. He looked down to see blood flowing freely from the cut he had made during the pact. The blood shimmered in the darkness, glowing faintly. The sorcerer snarled, "Do not listen, that blood is mine." Min pressed his palm against the mark on his chest. The pain was unbearable, but light burst forth, cutting through the shadows. The cries of the infants faltered, shrieking as they dissolved into smoke. The sorcerer staggered back, his eyes blazing with fury. "No, you are mine," he roared. Min screamed, pouring everything into the mark. His blood, his will, his very life force. Light flared, engulfing the void. The sorcerer's form twisted, writhing, his screams shaking the darkness. When Min opened his eyes again, he was back in the hut. He lay gasping on the floor, sweat and blood soaking his body. Old Bay knelt beside him, clutching his staff, his face pale with exhaustion. The sorcerer's figure was gone, but the air still reeked of decay. The mark on Min's chest glowed faintly, steady as a heartbeat. Old Bay whispered, voice trembling, "You drove him back, but only for now. He will try again, and each time, boy, he will be stronger." Min closed his eyes, his body shaking. He had survived the battle within, but he knew the war was far from over. Chapter 19. The Mass Grave. The night after the sorcerer's attempt to claim Min, the village of Tan Ha sank deeper into despair. Whispers spread like wildfire. Livestock were being found drained of blood. Children waking with bruises shaped like tiny hands, and strange shadows drifting across the rice paddies at dusk. Min's body weakened further, the blood mark glowing constantly. It pulsed like a second heart, binding him to the cries of the unborn. Each beat brought visions, infants clawing from the earth, mothers screaming, and the sorcerer's skeletal grin. Old Bay, though weary, refused to give up. One morning he led Min to a desolate clearing at the edge of the village, where the ground sagged unnaturally, as though the earth itself had collapsed inward. "This," Old Bay whispered, his voice breaking, "is the mass grave. Here lies not one soul, but dozens." The sorcerer buried the women he killed together. Their bodies were torn, their wombs emptied, their blood fed into the jars. This land will never rest. As they stepped closer, Min's chest seared. The mark glowed through his shirt, blood seeping from the old wound. He fell to his knees, gasping, as whispers rose from the soil. The ground trembled, cracks split open across the clearing, and from the darkness below rose skeletal arms. Reaching, clawing, dozens of women's corpses emerged, their flesh rotted, their bellies ripped open, their hollow eyes fixed on Min. Their voices rose in a unified wail. "Return our children, give them back." Min staggered back, clutching his chest. The mark blazed, and once again the voices of the unborn rang in his skull. "Father, father?" The corpses dragged themselves forward, their bones scraping against the earth, their mouths stretching into shrieks that rattled the air. One reached Min, her bony fingers seizing his ankle. Her jaw opened unnaturally wide as she screamed. "You carry them, you carry our children in your blood." Min screamed, kicking free, but dozens more surged toward him, pulling at his arms, his legs, their nails tearing into his flesh. Old Bay slammed his staff into the ground, shouting an incantation. Flames erupted in a circle around them, holding the dead at bay. The corpses shrieked, writhing in the firelight, but they did not retreat. Instead, They began to hurl themselves into the flames, their rotting bodies burning as they crawled closer, their hollow eyes locked on Min with endless grief and fury. The ground split wider. Beneath the mass grave yawned a pit of darkness, filled with the sound of countless cries. Min felt himself being pulled toward it, the mark blazing hotter than ever. Old Bay seized him, dragging him back with desperate strength. His voice broke as he shouted over the screams. "If you fall, boy, you will never return. The grave will swallow you whole." The corpses howled, their charred hands grasping for him, as the fire consumed them. Min collapsed in Old Bay's arms, sobbing, his chest bleeding freely. He realized with horror that the spirits were no longer content to haunt him. They wanted to claim his body and drag him into the earth to join them. Chapter 20. The River of Blood. The horrors of the mass grave clung to Min's mind long after he left. He could still hear the shrieks of the mothers, their hollow eyes searing into his soul. The blood mark on his chest bled constantly now, no longer healing, as if the spirits had carved an open door into his flesh. Days later, Old Bay led him to the river that wound through Tan Ha. Once the lifeline of the village, now its waters were stagnant, its surface dark and foul. Birds no longer sang near it, and no animal dared to drink. This river, Old Bay murmured, once ran clear, but the sorcerer poured blood into it during his rituals. Here he drowned the women's bodies after he cut them open. That is why the villagers call it the River of Blood. As Min approached the bank, the water stirred, his chest burned fiercely, and the voices rose again. "Father, Father!" The surface rippled violently. From the water, pale faces emerged, women with hair floating like black weeds, their eyes wide, their mouths open in endless screams. Their bellies were torn, spilling blood that darkened the current. The river churned, and dozens of infant corpses surfaced beside them, their tiny hands clawing at the air. Their cries merged with the mother's wails, filling the sky with a cacophony of despair. One of the women drifted toward the shore, her eyes locked on Min, her face twisted with grief and rage. She raised her blood-soaked hands, pointing at his chest. "You carry them, return them to me." The water surged upward, forming a torrent that reached for him like grasping arms. Min stumbled back, but the ground beneath his feet turned slick with blood. He slipped, falling to his knees as icy water splashed over him. The mark blazed, and he felt countless hands seize him, dragging, pulling, drowning him in their embrace. His vision blurred as the river swallowed him whole. Underwater, he saw them clearly, the women's torn bodies drifting, their arms reaching, their eyes burning with hate. The infants circled him, their mouths opening wide as they bit into his skin. He screamed, but no sound escaped his throat. In his mind, the sorcerer's voice echoed. "Deeper. Boy, give yourself to them. Through you, I will rise again." Min thrashed desperately. He pressed his bleeding hand against the mark, forcing the pact to awaken. A burst of light erupted from his chest, searing through the water. The spirits shrieked, recoiling, their hands slipping away. The river boiled, crimson waves crashing as the women and infants dissolved into mist. Min was hurled back onto the bank, gasping, blood streaming from his chest and mouth. Old Bay dragged him away, his face white with fear. "The river has tasted your blood now. It will never be silent again. Every drop that flows through Tan Ha carries their cries. And as long as you live, boy, it will call for you." Min lay trembling on the ground, the sound of the river's wailing still echoing in his ears. He knew the curse was no longer confined to the jars, the banyan, or the graves. It ran through the land itself, through the river, through the soil, through his blood. Chapter 21. The Village's Secret. After surviving the River of Blood, Min could no longer ignore the truth that weighed on him. The entire land of Tan Ha was cursed, soaked in death and suffering. Yet one question burned in his mind. Why did the villagers endure it in silence? Why had no one ever fled far enough to escape? Old Bay seemed reluctant to answer, but when pressed, his weary eyes darkened. He led Min to a hidden chamber beneath his hut, its walls lined with faded scrolls, bones, and jars sealed with blood-red wax. "Boy," Old Bay said, his voice low, "the curse is not just the work of the sorcerer. The village itself bears guilt. Long ago, When he came here as a wandering healer, the people welcomed him, not because they trusted him, but because they desired his power. Min froze, his throat tightening. What do you mean? Old Bay unrolled an old scroll, revealing crude drawings, villagers kneeling before the sorcerer, jars lined in rows, blood dripping into the soil. The crops had failed, the children starved, desperate. The elders begged him for salvation, and he offered it: wealth, harvest, strength. All he asked in return was blood. At first, they gave him animals, then strangers passing through, and when that was not enough, his voice broke. They gave him their own women. Min staggered back, horrified. You mean, they sacrificed their own? Old Bay nodded slowly, his eyes heavy with shame. Not all agreed, but enough did. The first mothers were chosen in secret, offered to him for the promise of survival. When the harvests grew bountiful afterward, the people convinced themselves it was worth the cost. Year after year, the cycle continued, until the sorcerer no longer needed to ask. They brought him victims willingly. The chamber seemed to close in on Min. His chest burned, the mark pulsing as if the spirits themselves heard the confession. So the curse, Min whispered, is their punishment. Old Bay's hands shook as he covered the scroll again. Yes, the sorcerer is gone, but his shadow lingers because the village fed it. We are all complicit. Boy, the dead will never forgive us. And you, marked as you are, bear not only their cries, but the sins of the living as well. As if in answer, the ground beneath the hut trembled. From the walls seeped faint whispers, swelling into a chorus. Guilty, guilty, return what was taken. Min clutched his chest, his vision spinning. He realized then that the curse was not a story of one monster, but of an entire village bound in blood, and he was caught in the center of it. Chapter 22. The Silent Children. After learning the truth of the village's sin, Min felt the whispers around him grow heavier, more accusing. Every corner of Tan Ha seemed to breathe with unseen eyes. Every gust of wind carried the weight of unspoken guilt. That night, he awoke to a silence so deep it pressed against his skull. For weeks he had been haunted by cries, screams, and whispers, but now there was nothing. The absence of sound itself was unbearable. He rose from his bed, sweat dripping down his face. The lamp had gone out again. Though no wind stirred, the silence followed him outside, blanketing the entire village. Even the insects had ceased to sing. And then he saw them. In the middle of the dirt path, standing in a line, were children, dozens of them. Their bodies were pale, their eyes wide and hollow, their mouths sealed shut by stitches of blood. They did not move, they only stared at him, unblinking. Min froze, his chest throbbing violently. The blood mark flared, pulling him toward them. He stumbled forward despite himself, each step heavy as though he were sinking into mud. The children tilted their heads in unison, their stitched mouths twitching as if trying to speak. Then, in a voice that did not come from their throats but from inside Min's mind, they whispered together, "Father." The word echoed like thunder in his skull. His knees buckled. The children began to move, not walking, but gliding silently across the ground, their eyes never leaving him. Min pressed his bleeding palm to the mark, gasping, "Stay back." The children halted. For a moment, the silence deepened. Then one of them, a girl with tangled hair and hollow eyes, stepped forward. She raised her stitched mouth with trembling fingers. The threads tore open, blood running down her chin. Her voice was a broken whisper, raw and wet. "Return us, or take our place." The other children tore their stitches too. One by one, blood poured from their mouths as they opened wide, screaming without sound. The air quivered with their silent shrieks, rattling Min's bones. The ground split open beneath them, revealing a pit filled with jars. From the cracks seeped crimson light, pulsing in rhythm with Min's mark. The children pointed at him, their hollow eyes burning with accusation. "Father, come to us." Min screamed, falling to his knees. His vision darkened as the children surged forward, their mouths gaping wide, ready to swallow him into the silence. And just before they touched him, Old Bay's staff slammed into the ground. A burst of flame erupted, forcing the children back. They dissolved into mist, vanishing into the night. The silence broke. The wind returned, Crickets chirped once more. Min lay gasping on the dirt, blood dripping from his chest. Old Bay's face was ashen, his voice heavy with dread. The silent children do not cry. They do not whisper. They judge, and if you falter, boy, they will drag you into their silence forever. Chapter 23. The Blood Moon Rises. The days that followed the appearance of the silent children felt heavier than ever. Min's body grew weaker, his skin pale, his chest constantly bleeding from the mark that refused to heal. Even Old Bay's charms no longer dulled the pain. The villagers whispered of an omen approaching. Animals fled into the forests. The skies darkened earlier each evening, and a crimson hue lingered at the edge of the horizon as though the heavens themselves were bleeding. On the night it happened, Min felt it before he saw it. The mark on his chest pulsed like a beating drum, each throb sending waves of agony through his veins. He stumbled outside, gasping, and looked to the sky. The moon had risen, vast, swollen, and red as fresh blood. Its light bathed the land, turning the huts, the banyan tree, and the river into a landscape of crimson shadows. The air filled instantly with cries. Not faint whispers, not distant wails, but a chorus of screams that split the night. Infants, mothers, men, women, all the voices of the dead wailed together, shaking the earth. From the fields, the ground split open, jars cracked and shattered, spilling forth torrents of blood and malformed infants that crawled toward the village. From the banyan tree, women with torn bellies dragged themselves free, their hollow eyes burning. From the river surged pale figures, their hair trailing like weeds, their mouths spewing crimson water. The entire land vomited its dead. Min fell to his knees, clutching his chest, the mark blazing like a sun beneath his skin. The voices screamed in unison. "Father, Father, give us back what was taken." The air rippled. The hunter of souls appeared again, tall and faceless, its long arms reaching. Behind it loomed the sorcerer's shadow, skeletal hands raised as his laughter rolled like thunder. "The blood moon rises," the sorcerer's voice echoed, "and with it, my dominion. Boy, your flesh will be my vessel, your blood my throne." The villagers screamed as the dead surged into their homes, dragging people into the crimson night. The air reeked of rot and iron, the ground slick with blood. Old Bay staggered beside Min, clutching his staff, his voice breaking as he shouted, "The blood moon is their hour of power. If you do not fight, all of Tan Ha will be drowned in their cries." Min looked up at the sky, the red moon burning above, and felt the truth claw into his soul. This was no longer haunting. This was war. Chapter 24. The Night of Blood. The village of Tan Ha drowned in screams. Under the crimson glow of the blood moon, the earth split open and released its horrors. From the shattered jars crawled infants with twisted limbs and gaping mouths. Their teeth sharp as needles, they swarmed through the fields, their cries rising to a fevered pitch. From the banyan tree, the mothers dragged themselves forward, their torn wombs spilling blood across the soil. And from the river surged drowned corpses, their hair slick and black, their mouths spewing crimson water as they wailed. Every corner of the village erupted in chaos. Huts collapsed beneath the weight of spectral hands. Livestock shrieked as they were dragged into the darkness. Villagers fled blindly, only to be seized by cold fingers and pulled into the blood-soaked earth. Min staggered through the nightmare, the mark on his chest blazing. The voices hammered at his skull. "Father, Father, return us, feed us." He pressed his palm against the mark, blood pouring freely from his hand. His voice cracked as he screamed, "Obey me." For a moment, the spirits froze. The infants stopped crawling. The mothers halted mid-scream. The drowned corpses paused in their surge. But then the sorcerer's laughter thundered across the sky. The skeletal figure rose above the banyan tree, towering, his hollow eyes blazing red. "Foolish boy, you think the pact makes you master? You are nothing but my vessel. Through you, I command them." The spirits roared, surging toward Min once more. He screamed, forcing his blood into the mark, light bursting from his chest. The wave of power blasted outward, scattering the nearest dead, but the effort tore at his body. Blood streamed from his eyes, his nose, his mouth. Old Bay appeared at his side, his staff burning with charms. He planted it into the ground, a circle of fire erupting around them. "Hold on, boy, if you fall tonight, there will be nothing left of us." The spirits slammed against the fire, shrieking as they burned, yet their numbers only grew. The ground quaked, splitting wider. From the depths rose the hunter of souls, its faceless void fixed on Min. It stepped forward, each stride quaking the earth, its skeletal hand stretching toward his chest. Min's body shook violently. The mark pulsed like a heart ready to burst. The voices inside his head merged with the sorcerer's command, pulling him to surrender. The blood moon burned overhead, staining the world red. The night of blood had begun, and it would not end until either Min or the entire village was swallowed by the curse. Chapter 25. The Last Exorcism. The flames of Old Bay's charms flickered wildly, straining against the endless tide of spirits. The circle of fire around Min and the old man wavered, shrinking inch by inch as the dead hurled themselves into it, their bodies burning but never stopping. Min's chest throbbed violently, the blood mark glowing brighter than the fire itself. The voices inside his head screamed and begged all at once. "Father, give us back, feed us, free us." He pressed his palm against the mark, but this time, the light that burst forth did not obey him. Instead, it twisted, flickering red like the blood moon above. He felt the sorcerer's laughter shaking his bones. Old Bay's face twisted in desperation. He slammed his staff into the earth, shouting words that tore his throat raw. "By blood, by fire, by the heavens above, I call upon the last rite, an exorcism of souls." The ground shook, the circle of fire blazed higher, forcing the spirits back. For a moment, hope flickered, but the sorcerer's shadow loomed larger, his skeletal figure towering over the banyan tree. His voice thundered like a storm. "You dared defy me, old fool? Then let the curse consume you first." The hunter of souls lunged, its faceless void opening wide. Shadows poured from it like a tide, crashing against the flames. Old Bay screamed, his body shaking as the staff split with a crack. Blood gushed from his mouth as he forced his failing strength into the exorcism. "Boy," he shouted, his voice breaking, "this is my last rite. When I fall, the spirits will turn only to you. You must choose, bind them forever, or free them with your life." Min collapsed to his knees, clutching his chest. The mark blazed like fire, his veins glowing red. Inside his skull, he heard the sorcerer's voice. "Give in, boy, let me through. Your body is mine, your blood my altar. Together we will reign in endless night." And beneath it, the faint voices of the children. "Father, help us, free us." Min sobbed, torn apart by agony. The firestorm roared, the spirits shrieked, the sorcerer laughed, and the blood moon burned like an open wound in the sky. Old Bay collapsed beside him, his hand gripping Min's arm one last time. His eyes dimmed, but his voice was steady. "End it, boy, even if it costs you everything." With a final cry, Old Bay's body went limp, his staff shattered into ashes, and the circle of fire died. The spirits surged forward in triumph, their screams shaking the heavens. And Min, kneeling in the blood-soaked dirt, realized the last exorcism was no longer Old Bay's to perform. It was his. Chapter 26. The Broken Seal. The night sky burned crimson under the blood moon, and Min knelt in the dirt. Old Bay's lifeless body beside him. The protective fire was gone. The screams of the dead thundered all around, shaking the very earth beneath his knees. The sorcerer's shadow towered over the banyan tree, his skeletal face twisted into a grin. His voice split the night. "The old fool is gone. The seal is broken. Now nothing stands between me and your flesh. Boy." The ground split wide, and from its depths rose the shattered remains of countless jars. Blood bubbled up like a fountain, flooding the earth, soaking Min's hands and knees. From the crimson tide, infants clawed their way out, their pale faces twisted with hunger. Women with torn bellies dragged themselves forward, their hollow eyes fixed on him. The hunter of souls emerged from the pit, faceless and immense, its long arms reaching straight toward Min's chest. The mark blazed violently, the veins of his body glowing red as though he were becoming one of them. His voice broke into a scream as the sorcerer's presence surged into him. wrapping around his soul like chains. Inside his mind, the void opened again. The sorcerer stood before him, whole and strong, his robes flowing, his eyes burning like two suns. Behind him writhed the spirits, children, mothers, corpses, all bound in his power. "Submit," the sorcerer commanded. "The seal that bound me is broken. You are my vessel. Through your flesh, I shall walk the earth again." Min fell to his knees in the void, blood pouring from his mouth. The cries of the unborn hammered at him. "Father, Father, free us?" He clutched his chest, torn between the voices. The pact burned inside him. A double-edged chain, power and prison, master and slave. The sorcerer stepped closer, raising his skeletal hand. "Give yourself, or drown in their wails." Min's body convulsed. The mark cracked open, blood spilling out like a fountain. His vision blurred as the sorcerer's shadow began to merge with his own. The villagers, watching from afar, screamed in terror. They saw Min's body rise unnaturally, his eyes glowing red, his voice splitting into a chorus of children's cries. The sorcerer laughed, his triumph shaking the heavens. "The seal is broken. Tonight, I live again." But deep inside the storm, Min's soul clung to a single whisper, faint, fragile, yet unyielding, the voice of the woman in red. "Do not let him take everything. Your blood is your weapon. Use it, Min, end it." Her words pierced through the chaos. Min's trembling hand reached toward the wound on his chest. He pressed his fingers into it, deeper, forcing blood to spill freely, staining the void with crimson light. The sorcerer snarled, recoiling. "No, that blood is mine." The ground shook as the crimson light grew stronger, pushing against the darkness. The infant's cries faltered, the mother's wails softened. For the first time, the sorcerer's grip began to slip. Min screamed, pouring every drop of his strength into the mark, fighting not just for his soul, but for theirs. Chapter 27, The Crimson Flame. The void shook violently as Min forced his blood into the mark. Crimson light erupted from his chest, spreading like fire across the darkness. The infants shrieked, dissolving into mist. The mothers wailed, their hollow eyes softening before they too faded. The sorcerer roared, his skeletal form twisting, his robes flaring as if caught in a storm. "You dared defy me, boy? That blood is mine." But the light only grew brighter. Min's veins glowed red, his entire body aflame with a power he had never felt before. His scream turned into a roar, not of despair, but of defiance. The sorcerer lunged, his skeletal claws stretching toward Min's throat. Shadows surged, trying to smother the crimson blaze. But as the darkness closed in, Min's blood ignited. A flame of crimson fire burst from his body, scorching the void. The sorcerer staggered back, his face contorted in rage and pain. The fire did not burn like ordinary flame, it consumed sorrow, devoured cries, and seared through chains of despair. The unborn spirits that had clung to Min screamed as the flame touched them. But their cries shifted, not of torment, but of release. One by one, they dissolved into light, their tiny hands slipping free of the sorcerer's grasp. The woman in red appeared within the fire, her torn gown flowing like smoke. Her face, once twisted with grief, softened into a weary smile. She placed a hand over Min's chest, her touch cool against the blazing mark. "You carry our blood, but you do not carry our curse. Let us go, Min." Tears streamed down his face as he nodded. "Be free." The crimson flame surged higher, a pillar of light that split the void. The sorcerer screamed, his body cracking, splintering, his voice shrill with fury. "No, you cannot. I am eternal. I am." Before he could finish, the flame engulfed him, his skeletal form shattered, his scream dissolving into silence. The shadows writhed, then vanished. Min fell to his knees, trembling. As the void brightened, the cries faded, leaving only silence, a silence not of fear, but of peace. The spirits were gone. When his eyes opened, he was back in the blood-soaked village. The banyan tree burned with crimson fire. The river boiled with light, and the shattered jars dissolved into ash. The wailing had ceased. But Min himself was collapsing, his chest torn open, blood pouring freely. The crimson flame still burned within him, devouring what little life remained. From the heavens, the blood moon began to wane, its red glow fading into pale silver. The curse was breaking, but Min knew, the price was his life. Chapter 28, The Final Sacrifice. Min collapsed in the center of Tan Ha, his body drenched in blood. The crimson flame still burned within him, but its light was unstable, flickering like a dying lantern. Every breath tore at his lungs. Every heartbeat spilled more blood from the mark carved into his chest. Around him, the village lay in silence. The banyan tree had withered to ash, the river had run dry, and the shattered jars had crumbled into dust. The cries of the unborn were gone. For the first time in decades, the land was silent. Old Bay's broken staff smoldered nearby, its ashes glowing faintly. Min's trembling hand reached toward it, his vision blurring. He remembered the old man's final words, "End it, boy, even if it costs you everything." The sorcerer's voice had vanished with the shadows, but Min could still feel a lingering weight pressing against his soul. The curse was not fully gone. Fragments of it still writhed inside him, bound to his blood, his flesh, his very being. He understood then, to truly end it, he could not simply fight. He had to become the seal. Dragging himself upright, Min raised his blood-soaked hand to the sky. The crimson flame erupted from his chest, spiraling upward like a beacon. The blood moon, hanging pale and fading, seemed to quiver in answer. "Take me," Min whispered, his voice hoarse. "Take my blood, my soul, my life. Let this curse end with me." The mark on his chest split open entirely, tearing flesh and bone. A torrent of crimson fire burst forth, flooding the village, scorching the earth clean. The spirits that lingered screamed, not in anger, but in release, as they were consumed by the light. The ground shook, the banyan pit collapsed into nothing. The riverbed split wide and filled with fire before sealing into dry earth. The last remnants of the sorcerer's shadow shrieked and dissolved into ash. Min stood amidst the storm, his body breaking apart piece by piece. His skin cracked, his veins glowed, and his blood turned into flame. Yet his face, twisted in agony, softened into calm. For a fleeting moment, he saw them, the children smiling, the mothers holding their infants, their faces peaceful as they drifted upward into the light. And then, with a final scream, Min's body shattered into embers, his soul carried away in the blaze. The crimson flame rose high, consuming the blood moon until it faded into silver. The night grew still. Tan Ha was free. But Min was gone. Chapter 29, The Village of Ashes. When dawn broke over Tan Ha, the village no longer looked the same. The banyan tree, once blackened with rot, was nothing but ash scattered across the ground. The riverbed lay dry and cracked, its once foul waters evaporated into nothing. The fields, once haunted by whispers and crawling shadows, were now silent and barren, as though scorched by fire. The villagers emerged slowly from their huts, their faces pale, their eyes hollow with fear and exhaustion. They looked around at the devastation, at the emptiness left behind, and realized that the cries which had haunted them for generations were finally gone. But their relief was laced with sorrow. In the center of the village lay only a circle of blackened earth. Where Min had stood during the storm of crimson fire, no trace of his body remained. Only embers glowed faintly in the dirt, flickering like the last breath of a dying flame. Some villagers wept, others fell to their knees, whispering prayers. They had been freed from the curse, but the price was written in their hearts. One outsider had given everything to end what their ancestors had begun. Old Bay's hut stood silent, its door ajar, the ashes of his staff still resting inside. With both the old man and Min gone, the village was left without its last guardians. For days, the people lived in silence, tending to the ruins. They buried what little remained of the shattered jars in a pit at the edge of the village, marking it with stones but never daring to speak of it. The elders forbade anyone from mentioning the sorcerer's name, and the villagers obeyed, though fear lingered in their eyes. At night, they still shivered, glancing toward the barren fields, half expecting to hear the cries again. But there was nothing, only silence. Tan Ha had survived, but it was no longer the same village. It had become a village of ashes, a place marked forever by fire, blood, and sacrifice. and though the curse had lifted, no one could say for certain if it had truly ended, or merely slept. Chapter 30. The Last Whisper. For weeks after the crimson flame consumed the blood moon, Tan Ha remained silent. No cries echoed from the fields. No shadows stirred beneath the banyan roots. No hands clawed from the riverbed. The curse that had strangled the village for generations was gone. Yet silence can be heavier than screams. The villagers rebuilt their lives cautiously, planting crops again, mending huts, trying to believe that peace had truly returned. But every time the wind shifted, they shivered, remembering the price. Min's name was never spoken aloud, but in their hearts, they carried the weight of his sacrifice. One night, as the new moon hung faint in the sky, a group of children gathered near the barren circle of earth where Min had burned away. They played in the dust, chasing each other, their laughter ringing through the air. For a moment, the village seemed alive again. But then the laughter stopped. One child tilted his head, staring at the ground. His face went pale. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. The others fell silent. The wind carried a faint sound, soft, fragile, almost like a sigh. "Father." The children froze. The whisper was so faint it could have been imagined, yet it slithered through their ears, chilling their blood. The ground beneath their feet pulsed once, faintly, like a heartbeat, then it was still again. The children fled, screaming, and the villagers rushed out with torches, but found nothing, only the circle of blackened earth, silent under the moonlight. From that night on, no one dared to step into the circle again. They left it untouched, overgrown with weeds, avoided even in daylight. The curse was broken, yes, but deep within the soil of Tan Ha, something still lingered. And sometimes, on nights when the wind blew cold and the moon burned red on the horizon, travelers passing by swore they heard it, the faint cry of a newborn. And a whisper that followed. "We are still here." After the storm of fire and blood, Tan Ha was silent once more. The banyan tree withered into ash, the river dried, and the shattered jars crumbled to dust. The cries ceased, leaving only a silence heavy with loss. Min was gone, his body consumed, his soul carried away with the curse he sealed. The villagers lived, but their hearts bore the mark of his sacrifice. They rebuilt their homes, planted crops anew, and whispered prayers each night, hoping the darkness would never return. Yet in the stillness, the land itself seemed to breathe with unease. For though the curse was broken, silence does not always mean peace. Beneath the soil of Tan Ha, where blood once flowed like rivers, something stirs still, and on nights when the moon burns red, travelers passing by swear they hear it, the faint cry of a newborn, and a whisper that chills the soul. We are still here.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.